My name's Isabella Barriga. I'm an engagement specialist for Global Forest Watch, and I'll be your host today. Today's webinar, we're featuring diverse voices from the Global Forest Watch community. These are women changemakers that we identify that are working at the intersection of forest monitoring and forest protection across many other sectors. So really excited to put together an amazing panel today, and we're gonna have a great discussion. Next slide, please. So this webinar will be hosted in English, but we're going to provide simultaneous translation to Spanish and French. So you're able to select the language that you would like to hear today's webinar recorded. So if you go to the Zoom dashboard, you can see there's an interpretation feature. So you can select if you want to hear this webinar in Spanish versus French. So I'll give folks a chance to select the language that they want to hear today's webinar in. And indeed, this webinar is being recorded, so everyone will receive a copy of the recording at the end of the webinar. We'll also be taking questions throughout the webinar. We'll have a dedicated time at the end for questions from the audience. So please, if you have any questions or comments you want to submit, you can submit it through the Q&A button. So I'll give folks a chance to join and select the language they want to hear today's webinar in. Great, and now I'm going to introduce our speakers. So from GFW and WI side, we have our great speakers and moderator. So first we have Jessica Webb. She's a strategy lead for people and forest protection at World Resource Institute. She leads efforts to enable the locally led protection of forests and community forest rights across the tropics by supporting stakeholders and harnessing the best available data for monitoring and management, as well as identifying gaps, technology, and research, and deploying strategies to address those gaps. So Jessica has over 15 years of experience working on issues at the intersection of ecosystem conservation, including land governance, environmental democracy, accountability, livelihoods, assembly standards, and the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We're also joined by Stephanie Borcha. She's our moderator during today's webinar. She will be moderating our discussion with the panelists. She is a small grants fund specialist at Global Forest Watch. She oversees the Small Grants Fund, which helps provide technical and financial support to civil society organizations and communities and using technology to combat deforestation. And prior to WI, Stephanie has diverse experience working for several mission-driven nonprofits, including Cultural Survival, Fair Trade USA, and the Climate Reality Project, as well as ICUN. And then the next slide, please. I'll now introduce our great lineup of speakers. So first we have Abigail Frimbong. She is a previous tech fellow for Global Forest Watch. So she's a passionate conservation scientist with a decade of relevant experience in successfully coordinating multi-stakeholder conservation projects in Ghana, as well as Cote d'Ivoire. Her experience in biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation, adaptation advocacy, and rural development comes from coordinating projects funded by several initiatives such as the World Bank, FAO, GEF, and many others. So she is one of our Global Forest Watch fellows who worked extensively in Africa and really advocated for integrating the use of technology-based tools and forest resource management and forest landscapes of Ghana. We're also joined by Benita Nastami. She is a researcher at Women's Research Institute, which is a non-university research institute based in Jakarta, Indonesia. She joined WRI, Women's Research Institute, in 2014. And she's been involved in conducting gender analysis on various issues using feminist methodology and analysis. One of the issues she works on at WRI is environmental issues. And that's how she was involved with working with Global Forest Watch. So she helps analyze social conditions in more depth. And she's currently producing a master's degree at the Department of Sociology in Indonesia. We're also joined by Wendy Pineda. Wendy will also be providing her remarks in Spanish, but you'll be able to hear it in English or French, depending on how you selected the language. But she is a project coordinator at Rainforest Foundation. She manages the tools and specializes using geographical informational systems, GIS, looking at mapping, geographic and environmental engineering, satellite remote sensing, project management techniques to create participatory tools, as well as training methodologies for communities working to protect and manage their ancestral lands. And since 2007, she has collaborated with many Indigenous peoples organizations in the Peruvian Amazon when it comes to community monitoring, mapping, and technology transfer initiatives. And she is a native Spanish speaker. And last but not least, we have Tatiana Nana. She is the Central Africa Climate Technical Advisor for the U.S. Forest Service International Programs. She was also a previous tech fellow from Cameroon. She's a climate specialist with 17 years of experience in natural resource management, GHG accounting, and thematic mapping, as well as technical support when it comes to design, implementing climate change capacity building programs in Central Africa. She's been highly involved in REDD+, as well as monitoring, reporting, verification, and climate change mitigation, as well as adaptation policies and programs across the Congo Basin, forest cover mapping. And her work experience with the National Congo Basin institutions, this also includes working with the U.S. Forest Service, FAO, and World Resources Institute, of course. So as you see, we have an amazing lineup of panelists today, and we're excited to hear more from them during the webinar. And for those who may be new to Global Forest Watch, I just wanted to provide a brief introduction. So Global Forest Watch, it's a free public good that offers an integrated, openly accessible suite of tools to enable experts and non-experts alike to access information about forest change and mobilize action. So we offer a suite of tools designed to increase knowledge and transparency about forest landscapes, advance private sector action to stop commodity-driven deforestation and manage forests sustainably, as well as harness information to mobilize local action by governments and civil society. So thank you all again for joining. I'm going to hand it to Jessica Webb, who's going to provide our opening remarks for today's webinar.
Thank you, Isabella. Next slide, please. Good morning, good evening to all, depending where you are in the world. Thanks so much for joining us here today. So the goal of Global Forest Watch is to democratize access to data on where and when and how the world's forests are changing through free, easy to use, open source technologies. When we launched Global Forest Watch almost a decade ago, we quickly realized that if we wanted to reach the folks who were impacted the most by decisions on forest resource use, but had historically been able to participate the least in these decisions, putting data on a website alone was not enough. Next slide, please. We also needed to engage with changemakers within threatened forest areas who have the existing networks and relationships and a deep understanding of local contexts in order to ensure the data was being delivered to the hands of those who could benefit from it the most in a way that speaks to their needs and realities. With that in mind, we created the Small Grants Fund and later the Tech Fellowship in order to identify champions of forest monitoring technologies and further strengthen the capacity to integrate satellite-based data into their work to protect forests and the rights of those who depend on them. Next slide. This year's UN International Women's Day theme, DigitALL, Innovation and Technology for Gender Equality, recognizes the gender gap in digital access, which can prevent women from unlocking their full potential. This really spoke to us at Global Forest Watch, a women-led and majority female team. Not only have women's contributions to advancing science and technology been historically undervalued, women have also been underrepresented in the fields of forestry and land use management as well. This year's theme offers a perfect opportunity to feature some of the amazing women who we've had the honor of working with over the years through the Small Grants Fund and Tech Fellowship in integrating innovative forest monitoring science and data in their own work and bringing that information to others in ways that create impact. The women featured here today all stand out as exceptional leaders in increasing digital access and the impact of applied technologies. Thanks to Abigail, Benita, Wendy, and Tatiana for taking the time to share some of your insights with us. And thanks to you all in our audience for joining us online today to learn from them and celebrate their successes. Back to you, Isabella. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for that great introduction, kind of explaining what brought us all here today. So with that, I'm going to line up our first speaker. So Abigail, the floor is yours.
Hi, Isabella. Hello, Isabella.
Hi, Abigail. We can
Yes.
proceed to the next slide, please.
Okay. Many thanks for today. Good afternoon from Accra, Ghana. Good morning to the rest of the world, and good evening to all others. It's such an honor to be in your midst this afternoon. And my name is Abigail Frimpong. It's such a privilege to be part of this panel this day. And thank you. Okay, so as I said earlier, my name is Abigail Frimpong. I am a passionate conservation practitioner who works in Western Africa, specifically in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. I have close to a decade or a little over a decade experience working in biodiversity conservation, climate change related projects, as well as rural livelihood improvement events and activities. Abigail, I would say, started this whole journey from 2011 whilst I was still a graduate student at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And thanks to a wonderful mentorship I enjoyed from my mentor, that Mr. Prosper Entwibwe-Siakon of Arusha, Ghana, I had the opportunity to be introduced to what conservation is all about and what role I could play as a woman in this very vast area. It's always exciting to be part of programs and projects that tries to help improve ecosystems, tries to help improve their livelihoods, and also promote sustainable supply chains, most especially in the cocoa supply chains. I think my excitement with conservation deepened when I had the opportunity to also work at the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources during my national service, where I was equally mentored by Mr. Matthew Abebio, who helped me understand how policy really helps improve natural resource management. And then getting the opportunity to do much field work, engage in activities that help promote biodiversity conservation with French communities was deepened with my role as an international project coordinator with Conservation Alliance for about 5 years, where I was also under the mentorship of Dr. Yawose Wusu, who helped me appreciate what conservation was all about, how much I could do as a woman scientist and as a conservation practitioner through all the platforms and opportunities that I got handling all the projects I worked on. Interestingly, I equally had the opportunity to interact and engage with wonderful women colleagues like Henrietta, like Ernestina, several others, Astrid, several others that we've been with on this journey. It's exciting to be here this afternoon to share what I've done over the period with regards to the use of satellite imagery and technology in supporting local communities improve their forest monitoring efforts. And so I want to thank you all for having me here, and sure, I'm here to learn more and to also share what I do and do well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Abigail, so much for that introduction. It was great to get to know you more, and we're going to talk more about your experiences throughout the Mari discussion. Here are just some photos that show Abigail in action. And now we're going to hear from our next speaker. So I welcome Benita Nastami. You have the floor. Feel free to introduce yourself to everybody.
Okay, thank you, Isabella. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from Indonesia. As for introducing myself, I would like to tell stories about the identity attached to me related to where I live. So I am a Muslim and a Javanese woman and also a non-disabled. As a Javanese, one of the biggest tribes in Indonesia, and a Muslim who lived in Indonesia, I have the privilege of being the majority, so I don't have to feel worried or fear of being persecuted by my surrounding when I practice my religion. And then as a non-disabled, I have access more to buildings, to education, to job opportunities, and etc. However, as a woman who live in Indonesia, I am also vulnerable to being marginalized and discriminated because of the deeply rooted patriarchal culture in Indonesia. So this awareness of the multi-layered identity of women started to grow within me when I was in the college. I began to know that not all women are lucky. There are layers of different identities that lead to the layers of violence and oppressions against women. So yeah, next slide. This is what got me interested in working on the issue of strengthening women's rights and joining the Women Research Institute in 2014. And then in 2015, the Women Research Institute became one of the GFW Small Grant Fund recipient. And I was involved as a researcher and program officer to handle the project. From the project, I once again realized how women are also a vulnerable group in forest and land management issues. Next slide, please. So the GFW satellite data really support our work at the Women Research Institute to obtain information about the condition of the forest in the areas. These data are used as evidence to support the advocacy process driven by village women in the project area. The data about the forests around them is an essential tool to influence policy and hold companies accountable for their activities. What was interesting about our process of introducing Global Forest Watch to women's group in the village was that they say that they felt amazed that they could zoom in or their village on the GFW map to see the impact from nearby plantation and felt that the data gave legitimacy to their causes. I think this is one of the indication that their awareness of their important role in monitoring forest condition to support the fulfillment of their rights has increased. I think that's all my introduction. Back to you, Isabella.
Thanks, Benita. And it's great to hear all that you've done since the fellowship, and thanks so much for sharing, what drives you and what helped you pick this career. With that, we also have our next speaker lined up. So I'm going to give Tatiana the opportunity to have the floor and introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving me the floor. I am Tatiana Nana, currently Central Africa Technical Advisor for the U.S. Forest Service IP. I'm very lucky because I have the opportunity in my current duty to work in a project, in an initiative that aims at strengthening capacity and increase the participation of women of Central Africa in their national climate change processes in order to increase the number of women that are working in this field. But previously, I have been a Global Forest Watch Tech Fellow in 2018. I am next, please. I am currently based in Brazzaville, Congo, somewhere in the satellite imagery you see of the Congo River. I'm somewhere there. I'm living somewhere there. I said that I have been a Global Forest Tech Fellow in 2018, and previously I have been a contractor for the Ministry of Environment in my country, Cameroon, and then an MRV expert at the Red Plus Technical Secretariat in Cameroon then. And during my professional career, I had the opportunity to benefit from several trainings and in GIS and remote sensing. These led me to start working as a freelancer So I work with the World Resource Institute in where I produce GLAD Alerts newsletter. I also worked as a detailer for the U.S. Forest Service previously, and I got the privilege to work and participate in the CAFE FAO study on drivers of deforestation and forest degradation a couple of years ago. However, the Global Forest Tech Fellow was a trigger event in my professional career. Next, please. In my professional career, because it gave me the opportunity to work on a project that aimed at estimating forest loss in Cameroon, especially in the emission reduction program. One of the outstanding results of the study was showcased at the American Geophysical Union fall meeting in 2018. Then I published my first scientific paper. Within the framework of this fellowship, I participated in the Global Forest Watch Tech Camp, where I received several trainings in Global Forest Watch tools and got the opportunity to connect with the next place to connect with fellows from other countries. It was unforgettable. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana, so much for sharing your experience. Last but not least, of course, we have Wendy Benita here, and I'll give you the chance, Wendy, to introduce yourself. And just as a reminder, as I mentioned earlier, Wendy will be providing her introductory remarks in Spanish, but you can hear the simultaneous interpretation in English or French by selecting the interpretation option. Wendy, the floor is yours.
Buenos días con todos y todas. Soy Wendy Pineda. Participo desde la ciudad de Iquitos, que es una ciudad en la Amazonía norte del Perú. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Estoy muy feliz de participar en este panel con mujeres tan impresionantes como Abigail, Benita y Tatiana. Hace 18 años trabajo con el movimiento indígena amazónico, fortaleciendo capacidades y transfiriendo tecnologías para facilitar la construcción de evidencias, el manejo y gestión de las cifras de sus propios territorios y de aquellos indicadores que son prioritarios de documentar en sus agendas propias para la implementación de derechos. Siguiente, por favor. En los últimos años, colaboro con la institución Rainforest Foundation US, quienes junto a comunidades nativas y organizaciones representativas han co-creado metodologías y un mecanismo de monitoreo forestal basado en la comunidad que es bastante exitoso y que ha sido validado científicamente por la academia como una intervención que reduce significativamente la deforestación y fortalece la gobernanza. Estos mecanismos incluyen medidas afirmativas que han sido recomendadas por mujeres y hombres de los mismos pueblos indígenas que participan de las iniciativas para incrementar la participación y los beneficios de las mujeres en estos programas de monitoreo y vigilancia forestal. Siguiente, por favor. Rainforest Foundation US, en sociedad con organizaciones indígenas, se ha enfocado en transferir tecnologías como smartphones, drones, entre otros, y también información a comunidades nativas, principalmente satelital. Distribuye muchas imágenes satelitales a comunidades socias y en alianza con Global Forest Watch viene distribuyendo también alertas tempranas de deforestación y en los tiempos más recientes las alertas integradas de deforestación, principalmente a socios indígenas amazónicos que viven en zonas remotas y que no tienen acceso a Internet. De esta manera complementamos y fortalecemos sus sistemas tradicionales de vigilancia y monitoreo forestal. Siguiente, por favor. También en alianza con las organizaciones indígenas representativas, estamos interviniendo Entendemos que el acceso a la información y a estas herramientas forestales lamentablemente no llegan a las comunidades nativas dueñas de los bosques. Entonces, estamos trabajando para acercar esta información y la tecnología, este conocimiento también a comunidades indígenas para poder hacer esta conjunción de conocimiento indígena con conocimiento geoespacial. Entonces, estamos construyendo e implementando centros de información satelital para pueblos indígenas que están ubicados en ciudades amazónicas y también en comunidades nativas amazónicas remotas y que brindan respuestas a las demandas de información forestal. Muchos de estos centros, aquellos que tienen internet, están utilizando el Global Forest Watch para empoderar a las comunidades con el monitoreo, la medición, el reporte satelital de las cifras de su territorio, mejorando así el conocimiento de los dueños de los bosques indígenas respecto al aporte de sus territorios en la mitigación del cambio climático y también de otros servicios ecosistémicos. También estas alertas tempranas que envía la plataforma permite a los pueblos activar respuestas tempranas para la defensa de los bosques y prevenir la deforestación. Esta data que se está construyendo debajo del bosque también está sentando para algunos pueblos en Perú las bases de nuevos modelos de ciencia ciudadana basada en comunidades. Por favor, la última. Rainforest, junto con comunidades, está investigando e invirtiendo, y esta palabra es muy importante porque no solo basta con investigar, sino también invertir en medidas afirmativas de género es importante para poder mejorar la participación de las mujeres amazónicas, de las mujeres indígenas en múltiples niveles, desde la comprensión de las relaciones del monitoreo a nivel familiar, a nivel comunal, a nivel del paisaje de cuenca y también en el marco de las organizaciones representativas donde se toman las decisiones de propuestas de políticas públicas. Estas medidas las venimos implementando y promoviendo muchas mujeres dentro del equipo. Son propuestas que vienen desde las comunidades, pero también con el apoyo de muchos compañeros que están también apostando por estas medidas afirmativas de género y porque realmente somos creyentes de que solo trabajando con hombres y mujeres de los pueblos indígenas podremos mejorar los resultados en la protección y la defensa de los bosques y de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas. Muchas gracias por escucharnos y por invitarme a participar.
Thank you, Wendy, so much for your introduction and sharing more about your work. At this point, we're going to queue up our moderated discussion, which will be led by Stephanie Borcha. So we'll remove the slides so everyone gets a chance to see the speakers, to make it a bit more of a informal conversation. Well, while that's queuing up, I'll give Stephanie a chance to take the mic and she'll walk us through our moderated discussion. And just to provide an overview of how this is going to work, we'll have a few rounds of questions that are specifically targeted to speakers to give you a chance to learn more about their work and dive deeper into some of the things you heard about in their introduction. So we'll give a chance for speakers to address this round of questions. And at the end, we'll take questions from the audience. I see we're already getting some comments and questions via the Q&A button, so feel free to continue to send your questions. You can note who you would like the question to be addressed to, or if you'd like the question to be addressed by all the speakers. I'll hand over to you, Stephanie, if you want to get our moderated discussion started in just a bit.
Yeah, thank you, Isabella. Hello, everybody. As Isabella mentioned, my name is Stephanie Borcha. I am the Small Grants Fund Specialist here at WRI, and it is my pleasure to be here today with this amazing group of panelists. These are all folks that were part of the SGF, also known as Small Grants Fund and Tech Fellowship, before my time. So I am really looking forward to learning more about their experiences along with you all in the audience today. I did see some folks introduce themselves in the chat, and it seems like we have a really great group here that has a lot of really relevant experience in terms of what we're going to talk about here today. So I'm really looking forward to kicking off this conversation with our panelists. So I'm just going to jump right in. And I'd love to start off hearing from Benita with the Women Research Institute, which I don't know if you all noticed, but they share the same acronym as WRI. So you might get a little confused, but in this instant, we are talking about the Women Research Institute. So Benita, you spoke a little bit about this in your introduction, and I would really love to hear more about the great work that you all did in raising awareness on the impact of fires on public health and how this particularly impacts women. And then additionally, I'd love to hear about the outcome of women's involvement in the fire monitoring groups that were created from your work.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, for the questions. So the project of GFW that we implement in Indonesia basically was a follow-up to our previous research regarding the impact of haze on women's life. So regarding our research, the impact of haze on people's health is disastrous. And in that situation, women and children were the one who suffered the most. One of our findings said that due to the constraints of the accessibility and mobility faced by women and women with children, there is only 0.007% of the baby and child population in Pekanbaru City in Riau, Indonesia, who access the evacuation post. So it is a very small group of people who can access the evacuation post. In line with those findings, we felt that it was important to strengthen the community capacity to analyze fire more granularly by utilizing GFW tools, so that we took the first step to introduce GFW through education media, and then we consulted with the community regarding suitable media to promote GFW, and then they recommended comics and video as the media. After disseminating the comics and video, we noticed an increase in public awareness and community resilience, as I already mentioned before. They began to realize their important role to start initiative and advocate for more sustainable forest and land management. For example, as for the outcome, like you asking before, one of the successful advocacy efforts driven by women using GFW data happened in Pungkat village in Riau. So we held advocacy capacity building for women in the area. Together with the women in the area, we identified cases specific to women that were related to the environment and change in forests in their surrounding areas. So in Pungkat village, forest areas that were once people's source of livelihood had been converted to oil palm plantation. However, the presence of companies did not necessarily help the local people to prosper. So the people of Pungkat village face problems, among others, limited access to clean water, air pollution, and poor infrastructure, which is, in the end, it hampered to the fulfillment of the women basics rights. So during our program, the people of Pungkat village decided to focus on the fulfillment of women's reproductive rights as their advocacy goal. And then in the end, the people succeeded in encouraging the health office of their district to assign a midwife to the village to make to make reproductive health services close to the people that need them the most. I think that's all my response. I'm giving back to you, Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benita. Yeah, it's really cool to hear about the gender lens that you all brought to the impacts of wildfires, like especially in terms of livelihood and all of these things that we don't necessarily think of when we're talking about wildfires. And I really commend you all on the creation of the comics. I thought that was a really great idea to make this information accessible to the public, and clearly it had really great results. And I'm sure you saw it in her initial slide, but we'll also share some links so you can go and check out the comics yourself. They're all in Bahasa Indonesia, but it doesn't take away from the effectiveness of the comics at all. They're very engaging and really interesting. So thank you so much for sharing more about that. It's really cool to hear the details of how you all approach this problem from such a multi-dimensional lens. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Benita. So I would love to turn it to Abigail now. Abigail did some work creating a community resource and management area in the western region of Ghana. So Abigail, I was wondering if you could tell us more about your experience with these trainings and supporting this area, and you could even tell us more about what exactly this area entails and how it was created.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie, for this opportunity. I just want to say that my work has extensively been involved with local French communities who predominantly depend on forest resources for their livelihoods. Majority of these people are predominantly cocoa farmers. And so it was important that their actions and activities sustain the forest resources which they live by. Interestingly, in 2019, when I had the opportunity to be selected as one of the 4 Africans for the Global Forest Watch Tech Fellowship. It was a very timely intervention because at the time that this fellowship came was exactly just about a year after the creation of the Community Resource Management Areas program, which was under a broader program called the Ghana Forest Investment Initiative, which was a mega program that looked at several issues regarding deforestation and the like. But this time, the CREMES, or the community resource management areas, were more like an output of that project to some good extent. And so the communities had been
We'll give it a second and see if Abigail comes back on. I was very interested in what she was saying, so I hope she gets a chance to get her internet connectivity back. Okay, well, for now, let's move on. And if Abigail comes back on, we'll be sure to jump back to her because I want to make sure she's able to finish what she was saying, because I don't know about you, but I was very intrigued. Okay. I'll just keep an eye out for Abigail if she comes back on. But in the meantime, why don't we move to Tatiana? Tatiana, I was wondering if you could tell us more in your experience of how access to technology like Global Forest Watch has helped mitigate deforestation in Cameroon.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Fighting against deforestation, and I am going to add also forest degradation, because deforestation often occurs after several degradation events. It's important to know what resources are available and how to monitor them. So Global Forest Watch is critical forest monitoring tool. It provides reliable data on the evolution of forest cover, land use, forest loss, and even associated drivers as well. Moreover, Global Forest Watch tools, such as deforestation and fire alerts, have made it possible to track major deforestation events in Cameroon over the past few years. So actually, currently, the Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife staff, either central or regional, use these different tools for forest monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you for making that distinction of forest degradation, because we all know from experience on the ground that forest loss can be a number of different things and a number of different drivers, and that's why it's so important for us to have those on the ground that are able to go into the field and verify. And it's really cool to hear about the ministry that is using Global Forest Watch to monitor these forests. Thank you. It looks like Abigail is back on. So Abigail, if you are able, I'd love to give you a chance to finish out your answer. I was listening closely.
Yes, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think my link dropped, but I was saying that the Tech Fellowship was very timely, as in it gave me the opportunity to learn very much about what tools could be useful for the local communities to use whilst they go about their monitoring activities, because the key part of the premise was to ensure that deforestation, wildfires, illegal logging, illegal farming, and all issues that relate to deforestation are brought under control of the local communities. That is the essence of the premise to a very large degree. And so getting the opportunity to learn about the Forest Watcher app, which gave the locals the ability to see deforestation that is happening within their enclave and following it up during patrols and monitoring times, was very helpful and interesting, because then it made their activities very much managed, as in they didn't just go out there to monitor, but then they were monitoring based on alerts that they had received that something could be happening in a particular area. This helped them to put in the efforts that they needed in the right spaces, not to do things without, accurate or reliable data. So I would say that getting that training and then coming back to train the premise on how best they could make use of the Forest Watcher app was a very useful part of my engagement with the local communities that are part of the community resource management areas in the Western region of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail. Yeah, it's great to hear. For those of you that don't know, Forest Watcher is an application that can be used with limited internet access, and it's a tool that a lot of our forest defenders use when they are on the ground doing field verification visits of deforestation alerts. So it's really great to hear about a community in Western Ghana that is using this tool to manage their resources in the area. And it's great to hear that the various stakeholders that it's impacting, the cocoa farmers and all of that. So thank you for adding that color to the community resource management area. It's great to hear about some of the folks that are involved in that. Thank you, Abigail. Okay, so turning to Wendy now. Wendy, you talked a lot about your experience working with Indigenous communities in the Amazon. And so I would really love to hear more about how you've seen communities apply local and traditional knowledge in forest monitoring.
Gracias por la pregunta. Quisiera iniciar con la reflexión de que la información geoespacial y data que nos brindan las plataformas es muy importante y ha realmente cambiado la forma en la que los pueblos indígenas y también los especialistas vienen desarrollando el estudio de los bosques. Pero también hay que comprender que tiene serias limitaciones y no se podrá comprender esta información geoespacial de manera integral sin información que provenga debajo del bosque. Lo que es para nosotros solo cobertura forestal, con algunas cifras, debajo del bosque para los pueblos indígenas son flujos de información, flujos de conocimiento y principalmente relaciones. No, y esto no solo va de personas identificando árboles o elaborando censos, sino que hemos aprendido en el camino cómo solo estos pueblos tienen capacidades y conocimientos para describir cómo estas formaciones forestales interactúan con otras condiciones para formar focos de biodiversidad o para brindar vida a endemismos que para nosotros como especialistas no podemos predecir o no podemos mapear. También nos hemos aprendido que, caminando con ellos, que activar el conocimiento de las mujeres en el marco de estos proyectos de monitoreo, reporte, verificación indígena es importante, principalmente en fronteras agrícolas locales. Las compañeras tienen mucho conocimiento de prácticas que pueden tener impacto en frenar la deforestación, pero también en poner y recuperar, poner valor y recuperar bosques que han sido degradados. Solo la semana pasada estábamos brindando un taller a un pueblo indígena en Ecuador y una monitora viendo los mapas del Global Forest Watch y estábamos justamente visualizando el mapa de sus territorios de los bosques intactos. Y una de las monitoras destacó que ese mapa era idéntico o bastante parecido al trabajo de etnocartografía y zonificación del territorio que el mismo pueblo había desarrollado. Hicimos durante las prácticas una comparación entre su mapa etnocartográfico y de zonificación y el mapa brindado por la plataforma Global Forest Watch. Impresionantemente eran muy parecidos. Esto para nosotros fue un claro ejemplo de que el satélite no solo toma fotos de los bosques de territorios indígenas, sino lo que vemos en este caso son la representación de bosques que han sido manejados y controlados por la gobernanza de un pueblo. Nosotros podíamos ver ese mapa de esta manera en la plataforma porque este pueblo había decidido que lo veamos de esa manera y había activado para que su bosque esté representado de esta forma. Y conversando con ellos podíamos darnos cuenta que tienen el poder de documentar todas las prácticas locales que los llevaron a poder poder modelar su bosque y mantener su bosque en este estado que era curiosamente bosques intactos. Sí, eran bosques intactos, pero eran bosques intactos por la decisión y por la gobernanza de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, creo que todavía tenemos mucho por reconocer del conocimiento de los pueblos indígenas y principalmente de las mujeres. Entendemos que las mujeres en las prácticas de vigilancia, de monitoreo, tienen una gran variedad de indicadores principalmente para diferenciar los bosques que son sanos de los que no, y esto podría ser un gran aporte para los estudios de degradación local. Los indicadores que las mujeres indígenas tienen sobre degradación, o lo que nosotros conocemos como degradación, son mucho más robustos y también hemos aprendido que tienen diversos estándares de comparación para clasificar el bosque, pero también para clasificar el no bosque. Finalmente, más allá de todo el conocimiento, que tienen para la identificación, la descripción, está el conocimiento para poder manejar y controlar estos espacios. Esta es información que definitivamente no podemos extraer solo de la información geoespacial. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Wow, what a great anecdote. Thank you so much for sharing that story about how the Global Forest Watch map corresponded with the local Indigenous map. That's always so great for us to hear at Global Forest Watch. And additionally, as you mentioned, we know that Indigenous people protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So it's really important to acknowledge this and respect the fact that they have this vast knowledge, as you mentioned, of their forest lands and of the various characteristics of what makes up a healthy forest and an unhealthy forest. So it's really important to find ways to complement and leverage this knowledge along with the geospatial data that we are talking about here today. So I really appreciate you providing your perspective on that. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I think there is so much important knowledge that Indigenous people hold that it's really important to leverage in all of our collective work towards conservation and forest monitoring and protection. So that was a really great summary. Thank you so much, Wendy. And along this same track, I'd love to hear from a different perspective around the same topic from Benita in Indonesia. So a different regional perspective about, Benita, if you could tell me about the role of local and traditional knowledge in fire monitoring and the work that you've done. Can you tell us about, a little bit more about why this is important and how you've approached combining local knowledge with global data on Global Forest Watch?
Okay, so in Indonesia, the community for generations has been familiar with the method of clearing land by burning it. This is done because the community believed that burning land could produce the elements that can increase the nutrient contained in the soil. So we are at the Women Research Institute think that it is important to acknowledge this local value. And then we conducted the assessment before we approached the people and introduced the Global Forest Watch. We figured out that Global Forest Watch and the local knowledge can come together to promote more sustainable forest and land management. That's why in the early warning system that we proposed to the community, we suggest that the community chair verify the fire alert that they receive before taking an action. So the community can make sure in advance whether the land burning occurred massively on a land area of more than 2 hectares, occurred in occasion areas, or only land burning that occurs in community gardens with a total area of less than 2 hectares. So we think that this action is important to undertake to anticipate the criminalization of the community of practicing their local knowledge by burning the land, and also to promote more sustainable land and forest management. I think that's all my response. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Benita. Yeah, this is so interesting to hear about from you, because this is something I'm also familiar with in the States. The Native American communities in the States also struggle with this conflict of their traditional knowledge of what they call prescribed or cultural fires as land maintenance and a forest management technique. But the law thinks otherwise because it creates, carbon dioxide and all that, but it's actually a preventative measure. And, I know that at least in the States, there's a lot of work now being done to kind of like reverse a lot of the impacts that this has had on the now magnification of fires due to the suppression of this practice for so long. And I know in the States, there have programs now where they have the local community training the firefighters on prescribed fires. So that's really great to hear about how you all leveraged and centered the community members in this conversation about wildfires in Indonesia. So thank you for sharing that experience. I would like to bring it back to Abigail. Abigail, you mentioned in your introduction that you have experience working with biodiversity conservation, climate change mitigation, and adaptation, and improving rural economies. I was wondering if you could tell us more about the role of gender mainstreaming and behavioral change advocacy in your forest monitoring work.
Okay, great. Thank you once again, Stephanie. I would want to say that from my experience in conservation work, I mean, the work is done with local communities right from the beginning. And so the essence of engaging all facets of groupings within the area you're working is a very essential part of any success of a project. And so for the Cremas initiative, I would want to dwell more on that. Gender mainstreaming has been a very key part of all processes that I've been engaged in when it comes to conservation initiatives. And here, gender becomes a very essential part because projects have goals, and if goals would have to be achieved, every member of the community where the project is being run has to play his or her role adequately for us to be able to achieve the kind of goal we are seeking out to achieve. And so gender, when you do not mainstream gender or you do not engage all groupings within the community, then you risk not achieving your goal. And so for me, in my experience, it's been a very helpful practice to ensure that all groupings within any community that we work with, whilst I was at Conservation Alliance, we ensure that women and youth are equally given as much opportunity to actively participate as much as men are allowed and engaged within any project. I would say that this is important because if a goal ought to be achieved, then all members of that community have to play their role. And so goals are also achieved based on decisions as to what needs to be done, how is it going to be done, who needs to do what. These are all salient decisions that are made in project implementation. And when you do not involve the youth, when you do not involve women, when you do not involve other vulnerable groups like disabled, the young ones and all that, then you risk not achieving your goal. And so, yes, gender mainstreaming is a very essential part when it comes to conservation here in West Africa, and as especially in Western Ghana and then in parts of Cote d'Ivoire where I've worked. This makes advocacy a very essential tool that conservationists also need to use, because sometimes some of the gender inequalities are from some enshrined values and cultural actions and activities that have occurred over a very long time. You could get into a setting where men cannot have meetings with women. That is so respected because it could be a very cultural practice. But for us to be able to achieve consensus on certain objectives of a particular project, sometimes it's important to bring the women and the men together, add on the youth and the young people so that we can all agree on a particular goal and move forward. And for you to be able to achieve this, then you ought to go through your behavioral change advocacy very well to make sure that all parties are well informed, they make informed decisions to allow themselves to be brought together If not, you're going to have a big issue. And so, yes, gender mainstreaming is important if we are to achieve the fight against deforestation at the local level. And for us to be able to get this, we need to advocate that certain practices that does not allow both men and women, as well as young people, to have their voice heard and integrated in programs, projects, and activities ought to be done away with if we want to see the kind of future we are all hoping to have. And so, yes, these are the things I can talk about when it comes to gender and behavioral change advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Wow, so much to say about that. Yeah, you touched on so many important points. First of all, I love how, you know, you've detailed and really emphasized that, you know, gender inclusion is a non-negotiable. If you're not including all members of the community, gender vulnerable community members, etc., then your project is not going to be a success. That's just, you know, that's just the truth. And I also really appreciate the fact that you've partnered it with behavioral change advocacy, because, you know, any solution is not going to be just cut and dry, implement it, and then it gets done. There are embedded cultural values that need to be addressed, and various processes and the way that people do things in communities, and, you know, all of these you know, inherent biases or things that need to be addressed before, you know, being able to actually mainstream gender. And these are all things that are very important to incorporate in the implementation of such a project that you were doing. So it sounds like you approached it in such a great way, and I really appreciate hearing all of your thoughts on that. That was really great to hear. Thank you so much, Abigail. So bringing it to Wendy now, I'd also like to hear about some of the unique challenges that women in forest monitoring have faced in your experience, and how access to technology has changed over time for women in the communities that you work in.
Okay. El control físico de los territorios y de los bosques siempre ha sido un espacio de dominio masculino. La participación de mujeres indígenas en acciones de vigilancia y monitoreo aún está bastante lejos de la paridad. Las mujeres que han logrado o que hemos logrado acceder a estos espacios masculinizados, nos hemos enfrentado muchas veces a la crítica por confrontar estereotipos de género que son culturalmente establecidos. Estos estereotipos y roles de género son culturalmente más fuertes dentro de estas comunidades, donde no solo los hombres critican a las mujeres que han decidido dedicar su tiempo a jornadas largas bajo el bosque, sino también son muchas mujeres de las mismas comunidades las que pueden criticar a las monitoras, a las vigilantes del territorio cuando deciden accionar en la defensa de los bosques. En ese sentido, el trabajo o el activismo de mujeres indígenas en temas de monitoreo y vigilancia forestal se basa en compromisos desiguales, porque nuestras compañeras monitoras también luego de sus largas jornadas de monitoreo retornan a sus casas para además poder cumplir con sus cargas domésticas. Quiero decir entonces que muchas de las mujeres en comunidades indígenas que están activando dentro de estos programas de monitoreo forestal tienen más trabajo en el día a día que los varones y mayormente menos prestigio dentro de la comunidad por defender sus bosques. Esta situación nos hace pensar y nos hace activar mecanismos de inversión para la implementación de medidas afirmativas que permitan a las mujeres, que comprendan la situación de las mujeres dentro de la comunidad, dentro de una organización indígena, dentro de un pueblo, para facilitar el acceso al fortalecimiento de capacidades, también a cargos dentro de acciones físicas de monitoreo territorial, y que también puedan participar no solo en el control físico del territorio, sino también en el control político que proviene de las decisiones y de la información que proviene del territorio. También un espacio que es muy poco abordado es poder brindar a las mujeres indígenas este control intelectual diferenciado de los datos que ellas construyen. Quizás lo más difícil para los que trabajamos en este ámbito es poder promover medidas que sean pertinentes de manera cultural y que no vayan a generar conflictos dentro de los pueblos. Una de las recomendaciones, tanto de hombres como de mujeres, principalmente era relacionada con recuperar el rol de las mujeres indígenas como educadoras y como las que establecen los cuidados. Y estuvimos conversando mucho sobre el tema de cuidados en los últimos tiempos, entendiendo cómo son las mujeres las que están construyendo estas políticas dentro de casa, de enseñanza, de cuidado del territorio y de las relaciones que se generan entre familias de la comunidad, entre comunidades. Son ellas las que enseñan las normas de convivencia entre comunidades y el bosque. Entonces, a través de la promoción, de la recuperación también de este rol que es bastante aceptado de la mujer, de las mujeres que cuidan, es que podemos avanzar en una inserción, en aumentar la inserción de las mujeres en este tipo de programas, adicionalmente de otras medidas afirmativas. Como muchos de los programas y de las metodologías que implementamos en los bosques, en los territorios indígenas con las comunidades, se basan también en transferir, donar tecnología e información. En los inicios fuimos bastante conscientes de que estábamos incrementando la brecha de acceso a las mujeres a estos cargos de monitoreo. Si antes era difícil que una mujer indígena sea elegida como monitora, al sumar en la ecuación la tecnología, que es un objeto de poder, las alejamos más de la posibilidad de poder participar o de poder acceder a un cargo y de poder acceder a esta tecnología. En ese sentido, para nosotros fue muy importante poder establecer estas medidas afirmativas que implican cargos especializados para mujeres. Contamos dentro de los proyectos con mujeres indígenas que son entrenadoras de transferencia de tecnología y que muestran tanto a mujeres jóvenes, a madres, no hay que asustarse y que pueden la protección de sus territorios. También estamos revisando mucho el tema de los usos e intereses diferenciados de las tecnologías para mujeres. Sabemos que ahora con los drones muchas más mujeres pueden participar con mejor seguridad en las tareas de monitoreo, pero también estamos aprendiendo que las mujeres indígenas pueden construir narrativas mucho más complejas para describir el territorio y las relaciones que en él se dan. Entonces, creemos que
Okay, it looks like we might have lost Wendy once again while I'm on the edge of my seat, paying attention and listening so intently to all of the plethora of
Estamos todavía en modalidad para que las mujeres puedan ver los reportes de los territorios indígenas.
I'll give it a minute to see if Wendy comes back. Hi, Wendy. I saw.
Hola, disculpen, estoy en la selva, hay mucha inestabilidad de conexión, pero no tengo idea en qué momento se cortó la comunicación. Solo quería indicar que ahora hay más mujeres que antes participando en estos programas, pero aún hay mucho más por hacer para mejorar los indicadores de participación de las mujeres.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy. Wow, so many things that you touched on. I had to take notes to keep track of all of the things that you were talking about. Really quickly, because I know we're kind of running out of time, but I do want to make sure I kind of touch on the things that Wendy mentioned. Really great point about unpaid labor of women and raising awareness within the community for this. You know, I think this response did a really good job complementing Abigail's response earlier in terms of kind of offering Wendy's own specific examples of how they strategically worked with leveraging and positioning women in the project. So, for example, reestablishing Indigenous women's roles as educators, so important in terms of kind of establishing this really important community dynamic in terms of like getting this project to be able to execute and ensuring women's participation is honored and respected and heard. Also really great point about drones. We're seeing more of our small grants fund projects utilize drones. It's a really great way to participate in forest monitoring activities while ensuring safety, but also getting pretty accurate images of what is actually happening in the area of deforestation alerts. So a lot of really great points, Wendy. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to Tatiana. Tatiana, as a woman scientist in your field, pretty well recognized. This is a field which has historically been male dominated. Are there any challenges that you've faced in the GIS, geospatial information, and remote sensing, monitoring, reporting verification field? A lot of acronyms. The second one, monitoring, reporting, verification, also known as MRV. Over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you for giving me the floor. That's an interesting question. First, I don't feel like I am recognizing my field in the field of GIS and MRV, remote sensing. But back to the question, I will highlight that I was privileged to be raised up in a country where the education system is not it's favorable either for male and female children. But in my professional career, the main difficulty that I faced was, I would say, inherent to in the field itself, which is quite difficult. Remote sensing GIS are complicated. The methodologies are complicated and fast changing. But I have been fortunate enough to have good mentors who have encouraged me, and I also benefited from a lot of academic and professional trainings. I seize the opportunity of this audience to thank all national and international institutions that contributed to strengthen my capacities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. That's really great to hear. And I'm glad that you've had so many mentors along the way to further your career. So I have one final question for all of you, which I would love to hear very briefly so we can make sure that we have time for questions. So I would love to hear if you could each briefly answer. What advice would you give to young women who are interested in pursuing opportunities in the science, technology, engineering, and math, also known as STEM, GIS, or forestry field? I'll kick it back to you, Tatiana, and I'll prompt each one of you once you're done.
Thank you. I would strongly encourage women, students, and young professionals as well to go into science and technology, geospatial engineering, or forestry. I think women are naturally I think that women's natural abilities, they have a keen sense of observation and detail. They are meticulous and hardworking. All these make women well equipped for this kind of work. I advise them not to miss out on training opportunities, even if they are online and they are free. They should always keep abreast of new technologies, methodologies in the field, and keep up to date. And one last piece of advice I can't take credit for. It was given to me by a very wise lady, is to have mentors who will tell you what your strengths and weaknesses are, and humbly accept that they will correct your mistakes so that you can improve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Wendy, let's hear from you briefly. If your connection is back, it looks like you're going to go off camera to strengthen the correct connection.
Sí, puede ser bastante intimidante poder entrar en este mundo de ciencia, tecnología, GIS. Hay muchas condiciones habilitantes que se tienen que cumplir antes de entrar a estos espacios, y esto ha generado siempre mucho temor, principalmente para grupos más, para minorías. Pero bueno, ya los tiempos están cambiando, y yo lo que puedo recomendar es que no tengamos miedo a hacerlo, y si lo tenemos, pues que ubiquemos una red. Ahora, además de las capacitaciones que comentaba nuestra compañera anterior, hay muchas redes de mujeres que hemos logrado entrar en este tipo de espacios, y si no encontramos una red que nos pueda brindar este cuidado, este soporte para mujeres, pues creémoslas juntas. Acá en este evento hay un montón de mujeres que podemos aliarnos y construir un espacio de apoyo, no solo entre nosotras, sino para nuevas mujeres que quieran entrar en este espacio y que se sienten solas e intimidadas. No, somos muchas. Ayudémonos entre nosotras.
Yes, agreed. +1 to networking and, do one thing every day that scares you. Benita, let's hear from you.
Yeah, as we know that the information and technology sector that tends to seen as a male domain or field, so it's already it's already observed from varieties of study that women tend to enter the digital age later than men. So as a result, women usually discrimination when they are work in a sector that considered as the domain of men. So although now the gap and discrimination against women who working in the information and technology sector still exists, but this gap is slowly starting to narrow. So for young women who are interested in pursuing career in the information and technology sector or STEM, it is necessary to improve your digital skill and literacy, as well as be sensitive in seeing the digital gap between women and men, so that it is hoped that young women who are empowered in information and technology fields will in turn can develop a digital device that can close the digital gap between women and men. I think that's all from my
Thank you. Thank you, Benita. Great point. And Abigail, let's end with you.
Excellent, Stephanie. It's been such a refreshing afternoon, I must admit, and thank you to all of you for this wonderful opportunity. I just want to invite saying that for our young ladies out there who are considering which field to look into, I would, using myself as a case study, I would say that science is a very beautiful field that anyone who wants to have endless opportunities and who has the desire to go way ahead of themselves in a lot of ways, as in be able to do so much. I would encourage such persons to venture into science, looking at forestry, for instance, observing from my start from the university as a forest steward with Arusha, Ghana, moving on to the Ministry of Lands, to Conservation Alliance, currently just completed my MPhil in Biodiversity Conservation and Science, tells that there is so much that women can do within the conservation space, within the science space, whether you want to look at it in hard science or in whichever way. It is a very rewarding area. If you're a woman who is hardworking, who is passionate, if you possess the will and the capacity to make a change in our world today, then yes, I recommend you to join any STEM program that is available to you. The opportunities are endless, the rewards are refreshing, and I can tell you that yes, you'll be contributing to a very positive change in making our world a better place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Wow, I am so inspired and motivated. What great responses. Okay, so I'm not going to waste any time in passing it back to Isabella for a quickly Q&A. I know we spent a lot of time on this conversation, but I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did too. Isabella, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And thank you so much to all of our speakers. I feel like we could have kept the conversation going even longer, but we appreciate y'all taking the time. And I've learned so much from our conversation. We can go to the previous slide very quickly. We received a few questions and comments from the audience. We'll have time to squeeze in one from Pranali Sinha. Here she says, "It is great to see women taking the lead in protecting the forests. My question to all presenters today is whether they have witnessed any specific social practice which makes women more concerned about forest conservation, and what makes women across the globe to take the lead in this initiative." So I invite any of our speakers to jump in if you'd like to address this question.
Hello.
Can I take the floor?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I don't know whether it's a social practice, but what I was witness of, as I said previously in my introduction, it's important to train women because once ladies are empowered, they can they understand very well what are the issues in the forest. I like this word empowered because when you train a woman, you somehow knowledge brings power. So they are equipped to address the issues in their environment, especially in the forest. I am working currently on with women of an initiative, Central Africa Women Initiative for Climate Action, WICA. That aims at strengthening capacity and increase the participation of women in Central Africa in the national and international climate change processes. So within the framework of this initiative, women are trained, focusing national processes to measure reporting on greenhouse gas emissions to the UNFCCC, and also carbon accounting and climate change diplomacy. At the end of the program, they have diplomas, but also they are involved in national processes. And we also we were witness of the participation of both ladies in different COPs, Conference of Parties on Climate Change, and they really impacted their countries. So this is my experience that I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Tatiana. Really appreciate you sharing. I know we're just at time and just want to be respectful of all the speakers' time and thank everyone who's been able to join us today. We want to go to the next slide. I know we had more questions and comments, but want to invite you all to get in touch with our speakers. So I've listed ways that you can follow our speakers today, as well as their contact information. So all this is linked in the chat. Please feel free to get in touch with us if we didn't get a chance to answer your question. And we just want to thank you all for being here today and, you know, hearing from these very powerful women. You all inspire me and hope we can continue the conversation after this webinar. So thanks everyone for joining. Please feel free to get in touch with us or the speakers and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you again to our speakers. Have a great one.
Thank you.